Hey everyone, welcome to Sequence of Instructions. Thanks for joining me. Today we're going to cover a concept that's pretty complicated, and even today, when I'm writing complex JavaScript code, I'll have to remind myself of it and its principles because it is sort of hard to wrap your head around. In short, it's called the idea of context and scope, variable scope. I've thought about ways I could maybe convey an abstract of it to you in a sentence or two, and really nothing sticks. I think the best way to understand it is to just dive in and start messing around with it. So that's what we're going to do. You've seen me write this a bunch, var x equals 5, and you see me log x a bunch. And of course we know that we're going to get 5. And so far we haven't really thought about where x actually goes. It's just sort of this variable we declare and we can access, but what does it really mean to declare a variable? Well, in all JavaScript runtimes, there's the idea of a global scope, it's called, which is this really large object that when you declare a variable, it's actually going to make that variable a property of that object. To give you an example, well, not to give you, well, I'll give you an example in a second, but in your browser, this global scope is called window. So there's this window object that you don't have to declare. It just exists by virtue of it being a JavaScript environment. And if we were to log it, you'll see that it is huge. It has a ton of stuff in it. It's got all these functions, the majority of which you'll never use, but maybe you'll find a use case where you'll need it, and it'll be extremely helpful that it's there. But it's just a gigantic object. You're welcome to play around with it if you want. But what I really want to highlight here is that when I declare a variable x, here I did var x equals 5, it actually binds it to this global scope. You'll see there it is. So I can log window.x, window being an object, x being a property of it, which now exists because of this, and it's 5. And if I didn't have this, if I never said var x equals 5, window.x wouldn't exist. So that should prove to you that var x is actually binding it to this, what's considered the global scope, the window object. Now when we make a function, we've seen this syntax before also, and we say var x equals 5, and I do this, let's get rid of that. So let this sink in for a second. Oh wait, I don't want to say 5. Let's pick a different number. Let's say 15. And why would I log 5? Brain fart. Alright, so I have this var x equals 5. I then have a function, foo, which is going to make another var x equals 15. And when I log x here, you may be able to guess, but it might not be immediately clear which x I'm referring to. Why did I log 5 again? My goodness. So here, am I referring to this x or this x? And if I'm referring to this x, where does it go? What global scope? Does it go to the global scope? What does it do? So let's run it. Oh, I didn't call foo. So let's invoke foo. And just to be safe, let's also log this same x up here. Alright, so you'll see it. So we come down here, we print our local x, our 5. We then call foo. Foo is going to make a new scope. So once we're in here, we're no longer in, we're in this new scope of variables. And we create this new x, 15. So when we log x in this new scope, we're referring to the local x, the nearest declared variable x, which is 15. We come back out, and outside of foo, if you're not in here, you're again referring to this global scope, x points to 5. So that's why we see 5 from this line. Into foo, we see 15 here, and then we see 5 again. 5, 15, 5. Alright, let that sink in for a second. Maybe rewatch this first half of the video just to really make sure you understand this idea of var x equals 15. Because I'm about to blow your mind, maybe. There is another hidden object that you can use called this. It's a keyword. It always refers to the current context. And now context is different than scope. Sometimes you can think of them similarly, but context is different. So let's say I wanted to get this outside x. Well, I may be in a new scope here, but I'm still in the same, I'm using air quotes, but you can't see it. I'm still in the same context. And you access context using this keyword this. See how it changed colors? So if I were to log this, I'm basically saying give me the context I'm in, which in this case is the window. I'm still in the window. And I'm going to say log this dot x. So this being the window's x is 5 as we saw before. So we should see 5 come into the function foo, 15, 5 again, and then one more 5. And we do. So this dot x refers to the context that you're in. Yeah. And it is different from the scope that you're in when you're in a function. Okay? Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. So I have this window object. I'm trying to think of a way I can maybe show this better. So if I do console.log this, it's going to be exactly the same as console.log window. Let me get rid of all my other things here. So now I'm introducing you to, I showed you scope, variable scopes. Now I'm showing you the context. And, oh, that's foolish. They're going to be identical. What about this? True. All right, so this shows you this scope, the context that we're in, which we always access our current context with this keyword. The context that we're in is window. If I make my function foo again, and I say console.log this same thing, I call foo. Let's get rid of this top one, not to confuse us. You'll see, yes, even in this function foo, I'm in my context is still the window here. Okay. Let that sink in again, because I'm gonna throw another wrench into your life here. Hate to do this to you, but you can use functions. You can basically say I want to treat the scope of this function as a new context using this keyword new. So I can say var x, or let's say var bar equals new foo. So new foo is saying I want you to run foo and give me its context, or I'm sorry, give me its scope as a new context, sort of. Okay, and so because I'm saying new foo, it's going to create a new context, in which case this is going to refer to a local object, one that had not existed before, and this will not equal the window. Okay, it still printed the first one. Oh, because I called here. So the first time I ran it, that was actually right. The first time I ran it, this was the window. I called it from the context of the window. The second time it ran, I said give it a new context. Give it a totally new object that it can access. And so when I did new foo, inside foo, this no longer was the global object. It was no longer the window. It was given a totally new context. And so to kind of illustrate this using our example before, I could console.log, I could do this. This.x equals 10, console.log x, or this.x. Yeah. And the first time I call this, let me do this. So I'll say x is 5. I'll call foo. It's going to log 5 because in this step it's the global context, the window scope, which x is bound to. It's going to print 5. We're then going to set our global x to 10, or sorry, our whatever context we're in, that x to 10, which the first time it runs is going to be this x. Okay? So after this, x is going to be 10. Before it, it's going to be 5. So it's going to say 5. It's going to print 5 again. It's going to then set x to 10. We're going to print 10. I'm going to say bar equals new foo. It's going to print undefined here because my new context doesn't have a concept of foo, of x. But I'm going to set whatever this weird new context I created. I'm going to set its local property x to 10. And then I'm going to log bar.x. Because remember, bar is going to be a new context. I'm now going to have bar is going to be a new object, which is a context. It's now going to have a new property called x because I set it up here. Okay? So let's see this run. Exactly. So first we printed 5 from our just var x declaring it how we always had. We then run foo. I don't know if you can hear that truck outside. Sorry about that. We then run foo. It's going to enter this. It's going to say what's my in my scope, the context I'm in, what is my x? And it's going to say it's 5 because we're in the window scope here. We're in that global scope. Then we're going to set whatever context we're in, its property x to 10. And we're going to prove that, yep, we did change this outside x to 10. There it is. There's our print. That's this console log is this 10. We now declare a new foo, a new context using the foo function scope. And we say, what's the x here? There is no x at this point. That's undefined. You haven't declared one. When you do a new foo, you don't get a duplicate of the global window object. You get a totally bare bones object. It's as if I did this. At the start of this, I mean, it's not actually as if that. There are some hidden things that we're not going to worry about. But for the most part, you get a totally free object. We then say, all right, whatever context I'm in, set my local property x to 10. And now you'll see that we're able to access at a property x on bar here. So if we didn't have this dot x equals 10, when we ran this, you'll see bar.x would be undefined. This last undefined is this bar.x log. But because we also then set it to 10, the local property x to 10, we can then access that property like we would any object using the dot notation that we learned in a previous video. So this was a bit much. I thought about doing video of scope and context separately, but I think once you're in the mindset of scope, it makes sense to just introduce context. This gets a lot more complicated, as we'll see in other videos. Future videos, we'll talk about making sure, like nesting functions and how you can ensure that your context remains the same. But for now, kind of let this sink in, rewatch it if you have to. This idea of a variable scope, that it exists in a function. If you declare a new variable in a function, it's a different variable than the one outside the function. But then also that you can manipulate variables using context and keeping track of what context you're in, declaring new contexts, etc. Alright, so if you have any questions, as I'm sure some of you may, feel free to shoot me a note, leave a comment. I'll happily get back to you, clarify anything. If I see the same question coming up a bunch, I'll make another video, really drive home the point. But for now, yeah, rewatch this one, play around with it, go to jspin.com, hack some stuff around just to see how the characteristics play out in a maybe more real setting. And I guess I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye.